are many different types of milk on the market these days, whether it is based on nutrition facts or the way it's manufactured. I want to help you be able to read all the labels and the marketing that is on the labels right now. So, first of all, let's talk about the nutrition components. Carbohydrates. Regular milk, dairy milk, has a sugar in it called lactose. And what our body does is has an enzyme called lactase that will break down that lactose into two separate, what we call simple sugars, called glucose and galactose. But if your body does not have enough lactase, the enzyme, the milk gets to your large intestine or your colon, and that is when your body starts to not just break it down, but to ferment those sugars. It should be broken down by the time it gets to the small intestine. So then our body doesn't like that at all in the colon. It brings a whole bunch of fluid to your colon and makes you really uncomfortable and have to go to the bathroom very quickly. So, people that have lactose intolerance want to avoid lactose. That doesn't mean they can't have dairy. It just means they have to avoid the sugar that's in dairy. Lactose intolerance is very different than being allergic to milk. We'll talk about that later. So if you are lactose intolerant and you generally like milk, there's three ways that manufacturers will help to break down that lactose for you. So what you're consuming is the sugar, the simpler sugars that the lactase in your system would break down, the galactose and glucose. So one of the ways it can be done, in which a lactate product would do, is either they add the actual enzyme to the milk, or when they are processing it, there's an enzyme in the manufacturing process that it ends up running the milk over that enzyme. Thus, when you end up reading the label, you see in the ingredients, it'll say an enzyme that is still in the milk that you can see that they have put the enzyme in the milk. So that's something that you're going to get from lactate. The other way they can do it is ultrafiltration. So what Fairlife milk does is they ultrafilter, or they put the milk through a very fine, specific filtration process that actually separates all the macronutrients, carbohydrates, protein, and fat, into three separate areas. So they're able to actually take the entire lactose component out, the sugar out of it. So that's what you're going to get here. You don't need the lactase, you don't need the enzyme, because the lactose itself is not even in there. So you'll be able to see those from the labels, whether the enzyme is already in the product or not. All right, and as you can see, they both look the same when it's poured. They look thick and milky. These are both 2% milks, and they're delicious, of course. So I prefer this one. I have been to their farms. They did pay for me to go to their farm probably about 5 years ago, right outside of Chicago. What I saw was very humane practices, and the cows are definitely happy cows. And I got to see one of the cows birthed, and the milk, of course, is delicious. They're chocolate milk because they already took that lactose out, and it's a super smooth product. Then the chocolate milk is probably the best chocolate milk I've ever had in my life. So if you're gonna give yourself a treat, give yourself some Fairlife chocolate milk. Next, we will talk about the different types of fat that we have in milk. So we have the fat-free milk, we have 1% milk, we have a 2% milk, and then we have whole milk. So right here is, I'm showing you the fat-free milk and the 1% milk. We can bring this 2% milk back up. Even though it's a lactose-free, it's still delicious. And milk by weight is the percentage, but it still is the equivalent of it having a higher calorie to it. So just because it's whole milk doesn't mean it's whole fat. Whole milk is about 3.5% by weight of the milk is fat. So less than 3% of the milk is going to be fat in whole milk, okay, by weight. And then you get all the way down to skim milk, there's going to be no fat in it at all. But what the equivalents end up being, it ends up looking like they all have the same amount of protein. There's all going to be 8 grams of protein, 7 to 8 grams of protein per cup of milk, same amount of carbohydrates, but really what we're looking at is we're looking at the amount of fat. So the whole milk, 3.5% fat, it's going to have about 8 grams of fat per cup, and you get less and less. So by the time you get to a non-fat milk, you have no fat in it, 80 calories, because a lot of those calories are coming from fat, but you still get the same amount of protein and you still get the same amount of carbohydrates. Lastly, let's talk about protein. So protein in milk comes from 2 main sources. Whey, which we've heard a lot about whey, that's what we use in our protein drinks, and casein. So casein specifically comes in 2 different beta caseins, they call them, an A1 and an A2. Cows originally made only A2 proteins, but through evolutionary process, normal processes, not GMO, not anything like that, through normal processes, cows can make A2 beta casein and A1 beta casein. What they have found, the manufacturers who make A2 milk, there's only A2 beta casein. And they found that sometimes people who have an issue with lactose, they think they have an issue with lactose, it's actually they're having a problem with the A1, or that genetic mutation, that genetic change that happened over time, type of milk. So they said, well, what if we can find cows that just naturally make A2 only milk? Naturally, camels and goats and different types of animals, buffalo and sheep, are able to make A2 only, but they were able to find the cows, that natural selection, that naturally have only A2 beta casein in it. What they found is that people that have a problem with A1 proteins, not everybody does, is that if they continue to drink that A1 that they're having problems with, they ended up having higher inflammation markers, and that can mean a slew of different types of health correlations. And they also noticed there might be some brain fogginess. So if you think maybe you're lactose intolerant, or you don't know if it's the lactose or what, it could be, or it could be the A2 milk. And you could always give that a shot. So this comes from only specific cows that are naturally bred, that naturally come, naturally are only able to make the A2 beta casein. So you might have some good results with that if you realize, well, maybe I'm not lactose intolerant. Maybe it's the actual protein itself that's causing me issues. And then, of course, amongst all of these, there's always a price point, right? So when I think about price point, I think about how much do we really need? So adults only really need about 2 servings of dairy a day. So one of those servings could come from milk, one could come from yogurt, and one could also come from a cheese product. The purpose of drinking or eating a dairy product when it comes to our health is, for me, taste. That doesn't have to do with my health, maybe my mental health, but it's to make sure that we're getting calcium in. So you could either get it from putting it in your latte like I would, or putting it in your cereal. Adding 1 slice of cheese is equal to 1 serving of dairy. So we really don't need that much as adults, but so that is how I kind of see it financially. Well, yes, this might cost a little bit more than regular milk, but am I going to enjoy it? Am I actually going to consume it? And it's not going to go bad in my fridge. And I really only need about a cup a day of it to be able to make sure I'm getting enough calcium, along with maybe something else, whether it be yogurt, Greek yogurt. I love Greek yogurt because of the protein content in it, or adding a slice of cheese to my sandwich to add some really nice flavor too.